They say Bigfoot is a myth, a blurry shadow in the woods, a hoax for late-night TV. But what if I told you they're not only real, they've been watching us? It started with my wife. She'd sit by the window and point toward the trees, eyes wide like she saw something no one else could. At first, I blamed the brain injury. Hallucinations, maybe. But then the knocking began. Always 3 knocks, always at midnight. I found footprints, massive ones, circling the house. And sometimes, just before dawn, I'd see a tall figure watching us from the tree line, never moving, never blinking, just waiting. And the strangest thing? My wife. She'd come alive in those moments. Her words returned. Her drawings became clearer. She sketched faces I'd never seen until I did. They weren't monsters. They weren't wild. They were curious, intelligent, almost human, and I wasn't the first. A park ranger vanished in 1986 chasing these things. His last camera roll, rediscovered decades later, showed carvings, symbols, a society, a family just like ours. Now they've come closer. They leave gifts. They watch without fear. They're not trying to scare us. They're asking them, will you understand or will you run? It started with a whisper. Not from her mouth, but from the forest. Most days, Helen just sat there, on that worn rocking chair facing the tree line. The cushion faded, the wood creaked, her hands folded in her lap, still as stone. She hadn't spoken in over a year. Not since the second stroke. Not since the confusion took over and left her drifting somewhere between yesterday and a name she no longer remembered. But that evening, though, something shifted. It was late November. Cold settled into the dirt like grief that wouldn't lift. The sun was bleeding behind the pines, dragging streaks of burnt orange across the frost-bitten sky. I was locking up the chicken coop, cussing at the broken latch again when I heard her murmur. I froze, turned. She was standing now, still frail, but her eyes were locked on something in the trees, glassy and wide. And then, clear as church bells on a Sunday morning, she said, "Why don't you invite them in?" I thought I misheard. My boot thudded against the porch step, heart kicking into my throat. I looked at her, then followed her gaze. Nothing but trees, pines all leaning eastward like old men in the wind. But I felt it. That pressure. Like something watching, like holding your breath in a room that ain't yours. She spoke again, barely a whisper, still staring. They're waiting. I didn't sleep that night. Life out here's always been quiet. 30 acres off Deer Hollow Road, near the edge of the Bridger-Teton Forest. Wyoming wind, endless pines and silence that could crush a man if he wasn't used to it. We bought this land 40 years ago, back when we still had our boys. Now it's just us, well, just me mostly. Her body's here. But the woman I married, she fades a little more every week. Doctors say it's Alzheimer's mixed with vascular damage. The second stroke didn't help. She forgets things, words, sometimes me. Most days she just hums those old gospel songs her mother used to sing. But lately, it's like she's been hearing something else. Every evening at twilight, she points. Right at the tree line. Same spot. No sound, just her hand shaking slightly, mouth half open like she wants to scream but forgot how. Sometimes she gasps, like the air got knocked out of her. Sometimes she weeps with no tears. I thought it was just the illness playing tricks, until I checked the camera. Old thing, rigged up on the coop for coyotes. One of those cheap models you buy at a feed store. But it caught something. Just a flicker at first. A shape, low to the ground, moving fast across the edge of the frame. No details, just too damn big to be a coyote. Or a man. I replayed it 7 times. Then I started writing. Doc said keeping a journal might help me hold onto memories, sharpen the edges of the days before they blur. I didn't tell her the real reason I needed proof for myself. Because if this thing kept up, I was gonna lose more than just sleep. The next night, Helen didn't eat. Didn't blink much either. She stared through the kitchen window like the glass might melt if she looked long enough. That's when I first noticed the sound. Not the usual rustle of critters, not wind through the chimney. Something lower, rhythmic. 3 knocks, fast, then silence, then again. I walked out on the porch with my flashlight, hand on the old Remington. Shined toward the trees. Nothing. But the dogs were whimpering in the barn, and even the cattle were stirred up, shuffling around like they'd seen a ghost. By morning there were tracks, big ones, deep impressions in the wet dirt near the edge of the fence, too wide for a man, longer than my boot by a good 5 inches. I followed them for a bit, through the frost, into the brush line where the trees start to thicken. That's when I smelled it. Rotten meat and wet fur, like a bear that had crawled out of its own grave. I gagged, turned back. The air felt wrong, like walking through the dreams of something that doesn't dream in our language. She kept pointing, every night. Sometimes she whispered things I couldn't understand. Sometimes she just made that soft moaning sound, like she was trying to warn me, but the words wouldn't come. 3 nights later I saw it. It stood between the trees, tall, unmoving. A shadow at first, nearly 10 feet up. Shoulders like boulders, arms too long for any man, and eyes. God, those eyes. Reflecting light like an animal, but not afraid. Just watching. Calm, curious. Like it was waiting to see what I'd do. My breath caught. I stepped backward, hit the porch rail. Behind me, Helen's voice, steady, clear. "Why don't you invite them in?" She didn't blink. Didn't move, just said it like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like we were neighbors and someone had knocked for tea. I wanted to run, to scream, to wake myself up, but instead I stood there gripping the rail until my knuckles went white. And when I looked back into the woods, it was gone. Nothing moved, not even the wind. I stayed up all night watching that spot, shotgun on my lap. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Helen finally dozed off in the chair beside me, her fingers twitching like she was dreaming something loud. That morning I found a line of stones near the back porch. Small ones, stacked 3 high, neat, deliberate. I didn't put them there. And from that moment I stopped doubting her. Now every night it's the same rhythm. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. They don't try to force their way in. They don't howl or snarl or break things. They just exist. Close enough to hear, far enough to remain a question. But Helen knows. She sits by the window now. Not afraid, not confused. She watches for them the way a mother waits for her child to return home from war. And I feel the ground shifting beneath my feet, not from fear, but something older, something deeper. Whatever lives in those woods isn't a monster. It's a mirror, and somehow, it's learning. I'll keep writing, if only to remind myself this all happened. That I didn't imagine the eyes in the dark, the footprints in the mud, the voice that came from a woman who forgot how to speak, until they returned. Whatever this is, it's not finished. I can feel it pressing in night by night. And the forest? It's listening. It was the old film that brought it back. Not just the memories, but the silence. That heavy, suffocating kind of silence that only settles when something's been left unsaid for too long. I hadn't watched it in decades. Not since the winter Jeff disappeared. Back then, we were young and dumb, full of coffee and state-issued optimism. Jeff Hartwell had just turned 28, clean-shaven, square-jawed, too good-looking for his own safety. A rookie ranger out of Boise, full of theories and trail mix, reporting for duty like he was auditioning for a postcard. I was his senior by 10 years, already weary of the stories this part of Idaho liked to whisper. Timberline ghosts, Devil's Ridge tracks. Locals always had something to say, especially when snow came early and the woods turned mean. But that winter, 85 bleeding into 86, things felt different, more reports than usual. Hunters swore they saw a white bear taller than a moose, Hikers whispered about being followed, and those calls coming into the station. They weren't the usual crank nonsense. There was something in the way they hesitated before speaking, like they knew they'd sound crazy. Jeff, of course, ate it up. He dragged me out to that overlook near Pine Hollow one morning. Bitter cold, snow like ash falling sideways. He held up a strip of film, squinting at it like it would confess something. Said he'd rigged up a trail cam on the East Ridge where an old woman claimed her chickens had been studied instead of taken. Not eaten, not killed, just looked at, watched. I laughed at the time, thought it was nerves or cabin fever, but when he developed the film a week later, we both stopped laughing. The thing in the frame, it wasn't clear, but it wasn't nothing either. 9 feet easy, just outside the center, leaning half out of view like it knew exactly where the camera's blind spot was. Snow caught in the hair along its arm, pale eyes, reflective, not like a deer's. More like something thinking. Jeff didn't sleep that night. I know because he came by my cabin at 2 a.m., holding the picture like it was a confession. Said he had to see for himself, said he'd go out alone. I should have stopped him. I tried. But you don't tell a man like Jeff to stand down once his heart's decided. The last time we spoke, it was through radio static. He was near Devil's Rest, said he found tracks, huge ones, headed toward the ridge. Then his voice cut out. Just like that. 1 second we're talking, next second it's gone. Silence thick as ice. I searched for 3 days before I told anyone. Snowstorm hit hard the second night. Thought I saw movement out there once, just a flicker through the white, then nothing. I followed his trail to an old firewatch cabin barely standing. Door wide open, inside everything looked untouched. Boots by the stove, sleeping bag rolled tight, can of beans half eaten. But no Jeff. The radio was smashed. Camera too. Smashed like something meant to make sure no one saw what he saw. But the strangest thing wasn't what was broken. It was what was still there. On the wall above the cot, Jeff had carved something, a symbol, almost like a tree with eyes. I didn't understand it then. I do now. Weeks passed, then months. His parents came. His sister cried. They put his name on a plaque at the ranger station. I packed up his gear myself. But I kept the photo, the one from the trail cam. I told myself it was for closure. But the truth was, I needed to know if I was crazy. And now, all these years later, Walter finds me. Sends a letter first. Says he read one of my old articles. Says he's seen things too. And inside the envelope, one still frame. Blurry, grainy, but unmistakable. The same eyes. I drove up the mountain that weekend. My hands shook the whole way. Not from age, from memory. Walter's place was quiet, off-grid, surrounded by pines thick as prison bars. He looked older than I expected, grayer, heavier around the eyes, but not weak, not confused, just tired in a way you can't fake. We sat on his porch and didn't speak for a long time, just watched the tree line. Then he brought out the box. Inside was a reel, old, labeled in Jeff's handwriting. I knew it before I even opened it. Knew the way you know a scent from childhood or a voice on the phone after 30 years. We watched it together. No sound, just grainy Super 8 footage. Jeff, alone walking through fresh snow, stopping, kneeling at a tree, tracing something into the bark. The same symbol I saw carved in that cabin. Then, he turns slowly. And there it is, in the distance between the trees, watching. It doesn't move, doesn't charge, just stands. Breathing, maybe. You can see the mist rising around its head like steam off a lake. It blinks, once, then walks away. Calm, deliberate, like it's letting him go. But the very last frame, Jeff's hand on the same tree again, resting on the symbol, eyes shut. Like he understood something we never did. I asked Walter what he made of it. He didn't answer at first, just pulled out a carved wooden figure from a drawer. Simple. 2 shapes holding hands. One human, one not. Said he found it left on his porch one morning. He thinks they choose who to appear to. That they watch, learn, wait. Not hunters, not monsters, something older. Like sentries of the land. Like archivists of things we forgot to respect. I didn't laugh this time. And when I told him about the carving Jeff made, Helen stirred from her chair behind us. She hadn't spoken since I arrived. But she held a pencil now, dragging it slowly across a sheet of yellowed paper. Her hand shook, but the lines were deliberate. A tall figure, arms long, head bowed, eyes glowing. Around it, smaller ones, watching, learning. She'd drawn the thing from Jeff's film. I looked at Walter. He nodded once like he'd been waiting for this. Maybe all these years we thought Jeff disappeared, but maybe he was just received. And maybe that's worse, or maybe it's mercy. That night I slept on the floor near the fire. Couldn't bring myself to leave yet. Not with that cold pressing in from the windows, not with that feeling I'd had once before. The sense that we were not alone, not in the way you fear, but in the way that humbles. And just before dawn, I heard it again. 3 knocks, soft, deliberate, then silence. But this time I didn't check the door. I just listened, because whatever this is, it's not over. Not yet. It started with the knocks. Not loud, not violent, just deliberate. 3 sharp raps on the side door, then silence, then again 3 more. Always 3. Always at the same time, sometime after 2 before 4, when the woods were deepest in sleep and the frost on the windows looked like veins crawling toward the glass. At first, I thought it was some branch knocking loose in the wind, maybe a raccoon or one of the barn cats getting clever. But the rhythm had thought behind it, like a pattern, like a question. I didn't tell Helen that night. She'd been humming again, low and quiet like she used to when the boys were small and couldn't sleep. She rocked herself slow, face turned toward the woods, her eyes sharp again. Too sharp for someone the doctor said was no longer fully present. But she was present, just not here, somewhere deeper. The next morning I found more tracks. The big ones again, fresh in the frost behind the chicken coop. But now there were smaller ones too, shorter stride, lighter pressure. I measured one of the prints against my boot, still bigger than a man's. But what struck me most was how many there were. 3 sets, large, medium, and small. They moved as a group, no chaos. Just a curved line along the trees, bending toward the barn and then circling back into the timber like they'd come to look but not to take. I followed them as far as the creek. That's where I found the stones, stacked just so, one on top of the other, 6 inches high, with pine needles braided between them like little ribbons. I stood there in the cold, the air still as glass, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not hunted, not stalked, just studied, measured. Like I was the one under the lens now. That evening, Helen finally spoke again. Her voice came from the kitchen, soft but clear, right as I was pouring coffee. They don't like machines. I turned, almost dropping the mug. She was standing by the sink, eyes fixed on the humming fridge motor. She nodded at it like she was scolding a child. They don't like the buzzing, makes them ache. The little ones are still learning. I asked her how she knew. She blinked slowly and said, "Because they told me." I didn't press. How could I? That night, the knocks came again. Same rhythm. 3 pause, 3 more, then gone. I stepped onto the porch with the shotgun. Not to use it, just to feel its weight. The moon was low, barely a crescent, hanging above the pines like a broken tooth. Everything felt wrong in that quiet, not threatening, just out of place. Like the whole forest was holding its breath. The dogs refused to come out. The chickens huddled silent. Even the cattle stood still, eyes wide, hooves trembling. But nothing was harmed, nothing taken. Just that pattern, those knocks. Like a message I wasn't meant to answer, only hear. The 3rd night I waited by the door. It came again. 3 knocks, same spot, and this time I opened it. Nothing. Just fog rising from the dirt, curling like fingers. But there in the middle of the porch, an acorn cracked open and laid beside a small, smooth stone. Deliberate, placed. I looked out across the yard, the tree line pulsing faintly in the night. Then I heard a low, rumbling thump. One single footfall, far but not too far. They were letting me know they were there. The next morning I told Helen. She just smiled and said, "They're getting closer." Later that week I found the bark peeled back on one of the tall spruces near the goat pen. Claw marks, long, deep, not from a bear, too straight, too purposeful. 9 feet up, I touched the marks with my hand, the wood still damp underneath. Then I found another cluster of stones, this time with a feather in the center. Black and white, hawk maybe, or something older. Whatever it meant, I didn't know, but it felt like something sacred. That night, it rained, hard. Thunder rolled so low it shook the nails loose in the roof beams, the kind of storm that makes you pray without realizing. Helen didn't speak. She just stood at the window again, eyes locked on the trees. The knocks didn't come that night. They came the next, louder, closer, not angry, just bolder. Helen stood beside me in the dark, one hand on the doorframe. She didn't tremble. She didn't flinch. She only whispered, "They're watching how we watch them." That line sank into me like a stone in cold water. I started seeing signs more often, structures, stones balanced in ways no animal could manage, pine cones arranged in perfect circles. Bark twisted into loops and hung on branches like ornaments. I knew it wasn't just one of them anymore. I was being observed by a group, a family maybe. The prints confirmed it, 3 sets moving together. Every morning new paths appeared through the underbrush, but never breaking anything. Just slipping past, avoiding the cameras now. They'd learned, and somehow they were learning us too. They never harmed a thing, never took food, never threatened. But every gesture, every visit felt more intentional. Helen started drawing again. She hadn't held a pencil in years. But now she sat quietly by the fire, sketching shapes that looked like twisted trees and tall, stooped figures with eyes that glowed. When I asked her what they were, she said, "Reflections." And then one morning something changed. The gable window had condensation all across it, except for one spot. A handprint, big, too big, pressed right at eye level, muddy but defined. 5 fingers. Palm, like a dinner plate, clear enough to see the creases. I stood there staring at it, heart pounding in my chest, and I realized they weren't just curious. They were mimicking us, trying to understand, maybe even reach out. Later that night, the knocks came again. But this time, I didn't go to the door. I sat with Helen instead. We listened together. The wood of the house groaned like it was breathing. The wind outside shifted, carrying the faintest smell of earth and musk and something faintly sweet like cedar smoke. And then, clear as anything I've ever heard, from just outside the kitchen wall, a knock, 1, slow, heavy, then silence, then 3 again, quick, then stillness. Helen leaned closer to me, her voice barely audible. They're learning how to speak. And all I could do was sit there and wonder if they were learning from us. What exactly were we teaching them? Because whatever was watching us from those trees, it wasn't just passing through, it was staying, listening, thinking, and waiting. Not for food, not for violence, but for something else entirely, something we hadn't yet named, something that had already begun. There was a line, I believed. A line between what belonged to us and what belonged to the woods. Maybe it wasn't drawn on a map, but it existed, in instinct, in tradition, in the way you don't tread too deep without asking permission. For generations, men lived by those quiet rules. But something about that winter made me realize that line had blurred, or maybe it had never been ours to draw in the first place. I woke one morning to find a handprint on the kitchen window. Not just any smudge. A massive, deliberate imprint. 5 thick fingers spread wide, palm pressed square at eye level, smeared with wet soil and pine needles. The mud hadn't dried yet, Whoever left it had been there not long before dawn. The house still smelled like damp earth and cold bark. It didn't feel like a threat. Not exactly. But it sure as hell wasn't random. It made something in me shift. That same day, I went out with a spool of orange marking tape, an old brass bell from Helen's quilting cabinet, and a double barrel slung across my shoulder. I started from the southern fence post and made my way clockwise around the full 30 acres. I tied bells to branches at head height, hung them like warning charms. I stuck the tape at the base of trees near the boundary, wrapped it tight. One wrap for each of the cardinal points and double for the corners. I wasn't just building a perimeter. I was setting a rule. This was me saying, "This is our side, stay on yours." I know how that sounds, I do. But I didn't do it out of fear. I did it because I needed some sense of control, like maybe if I made the rules, the game wouldn't change. But it already had. I just didn't know how much yet. That night, I stayed up later than usual. Sat by the kitchen with all the lights out. Just a lantern on the table and the shotgun resting against my leg. Helen was upstairs, quiet. She'd taken to sleeping by the window, whispering to the dark like it was her job to listen for something I wasn't meant to hear. The knocks didn't come, but just past 3 I heard a thump, not on the wall, on the roof. I froze. Heart went tight. Another thump, like something heavy stepping carefully above us, then nothing. I didn't move for 15 minutes, hands sweating around the stock of the gun. Eventually, I crept to the front door and opened it slow. Stillness, cold, faint sound of water moving through the distant creek. Then I noticed something strange. The bells were gone, all of them. Every damn one I'd hung. The strings were still tied in place, but the bells, gone, vanished like someone had plucked them off one by one with careful fingers. I walked the full perimeter the next morning. Not a single bell on the property, not one on the ground either, just gone. But the strangest part wasn't their absence. It was what had replaced them. Where each bell had been, a pine cone now sat at the base of the tree, balanced perfectly upright. Same number, same positions. Like they'd understood the message and answered in kind. I didn't touch them, didn't move a thing. Later that afternoon, I found a small set of prints by the goat pen. Not the big ones, these were smaller, child-sized but longer, more spread, toes wide, no shoes. The goats hadn't made a sound, but the gate was ajar and the hay had been rearranged in a spiral. Neat, geometric, not random. Helen watched me from the porch, her hair caught in the wind, a blanket over her shoulders. She didn't say a word, just looked at me like she already knew. And maybe she did. She always saw further than I did. Then came the night the barn doors swung open. I locked them every evening. Same way, same order. Even had a nail through the latch because one of the horses kept nudging it loose. But that morning, every stall door stood wide, animals shaken, not injured, not missing, just unsettled. One of the cows had foam at her mouth. The chickens wouldn't come out of the coop, the dogs wouldn't bark, they just whimpered low, tails down, eyes fixed on the tree line like they were waiting for the sky to fall. Inside the barn, nothing was stolen, nothing broken, just a rearrangement. Hay bales moved to the center, rakes and tools leaned together like a sculpture, and drawn into the dust on the floor, bare footprints in a circle, multiple sizes. Some dragging slightly, some light and straight, but they all faced inward like a gathering. I felt my stomach drop. My hands shook in a way they hadn't since the war. That night, Helen finally spoke again. Her words didn't sound like herself at first, more like a borrowed voice, low and clear. "This isn't mischief, it's a test." I asked her what she meant. She closed her eyes, leaned into the arm of the couch like she was listening to a sermon no one else could hear. They want to know how far they can come, how far we'll allow, whether we're going to be like the others, the ones who tried to own everything, even what wasn't meant to be touched. She looked at me, then really looked, and they're watching how you answer. I didn't sleep that night. And when I finally gave in to exhaustion sometime before dawn, I woke up with the worst feeling I'd had in years. I wasn't alone. I opened my eyes, heart pounding. Nothing moved in the room, but out the window, just before the glass fogged with my breath, I saw it. A shape, large, broad-shouldered, moving away from the porch, slow and calm, not fleeing, just done. I ran outside in nothing but boots and a thermal, the shotgun in hand. The ground was soft from the night rain. Mud sucked at my heels. That's when I saw the tracks. And the handprint. Another one, this time not on glass. On the truck's windshield, right above the driver's side, like it had leaned in to look. The smear ran down to the hood, a streak of moisture and grit. I followed the trail with my eyes. That's when I saw her, the largest one I'd seen yet. Standing just past the second fence at the edge of the clearing, half lit by moonlight, fur thick and matted, shoulders like granite. She stood upright, breathing slow, hands at her sides. I raised the gun, not because I meant to use it, but because I didn't know what else to do. And she didn't flinch, didn't growl, just stared. Her head tilted slightly, one step forward, deliberate, calm. Her eyes, not hostile, not afraid, but something else, something older, wiser. Then just as slow, she turned and walked back into the trees. Didn't rush, didn't look back, like she'd just confirmed something she already suspected. I stood there until the cold took my fingers numb. I didn't tell Helen I didn't need to. The next day she was painting, using watercolors I didn't know she still had. Shapes of trees and shadows, circles of creatures that looked almost human but not quite. And in the center, our house, small, fragile, under watch. I watched her brush stroke across the page, steady as ever. And for the first time in weeks, I felt it clear as the wind. We were being weighed, measured, and the forest had yet to decide if we belonged, not just here, but anywhere near them. And night was coming again. It was the smell of wet moss and sap that pulled me off the trail that morning. The air was heavy, still dripping from last night's rain, and something in my bones told me I needed to check the ravine near the northern edge of the property. I hadn't been down there in weeks, too steep, too slick. But I kept thinking about the bells, about how they disappeared, about how calm she was when it happened. I think I was hoping for a reason to call it all imagination. Instead, I found the film. It was tucked inside a hollowed cedar stump wrapped in waxed cloth, the kind they used for meat back in the day. Tied with twine, the knot looked too neat to be chance. Not a scrap of mold, not a chew mark. It had been placed, not dropped. I took it back to the house, spread it open on the table beside the fire while Helen sat behind me, watching in that quiet way of hers, half there and half somewhere else. The reel wasn't labeled, but I knew that color, that size, that smell of old acetate and pine. Same stock they used for Ranger cams in the 80s. I hadn't seen one like it since Jeff Hartwell disappeared. I didn't have the equipment to play it, but Thomas did. I called him that same day, told him I found something. Didn't say what. He drove up the next morning earlier than I expected with a thermos of black coffee and the same quiet weight in his face I remembered from all those years ago. He didn't ask for pleasantries, just looked at the reel, then at me and nodded. We ran it through an old Super 8 viewer he'd brought, the thing humming like it might cough itself apart. The screen flickered to life in shaky color, frame by frame. And there he was, Jeff, younger than I remembered, even though he was older than me back then. He was walking along a ridge, camera low, breathing shallow. Snow still clung to the trees. His boots crunched over a patch of ice, careful not to slip. Then the image jumped, cut, then came back. He was in a clearing now, frozen, facing something off frame. His lips moved, no sound. The frame shook slightly, like he was trying not to move the camera too fast. Then it came into view. Not all of it, just a piece. Shoulder, arm, part of a face. Pale fur, matted. A massive form just at the edge, half obscured by shadow, framed by two trees. But not hostile, not advancing, just standing, watching. Still, Thomas leaned forward, his face close to the screen, like if he blinked he'd lose it. My breath caught when the figure moved, not toward Jeff, but away. Slow. Like it had been seen enough. Like it had no interest in running or hiding, only in being understood. The last seconds of the reel showed Jeff kneeling at the base of a tree, pulling off his glove, reaching out to trace something on the bark. A shape, not letters. A symbol. I recognized it instantly. Same one carved into the post by the back pasture. Same one I found in those dirt spirals near the barn, where the goats had stood too quiet and the straw had been disturbed without a single hoof print nearby. Thomas didn't speak right away. Just took a long breath through his nose and let it out slow. "They let him go," he said finally. I looked at him. He shook his head. Or they took him somewhere different, not away, just further in. I remembered the cabin. That old one we found upstate when we searched for Jeff. How everything had been left like he just stepped out for firewood. The knife by the bed, the map on the wall, the cold coffee in the enamel mug. But there'd been no blood, no sign of struggle. Just a torn strap, a snapped radio, and the carving. Thomas stared into the flames now, hands clenched between his knees. "We always assume the worst," he said, "but what if they weren't hunting him? What if they were testing, choosing?" Helen, who hadn't said a word since he arrived, stood from her chair and walked to the window. She stood so still it unnerved me. Then she said, "They don't choose like we do. It's not good or bad, it's resonance." We both turned to her. She didn't look at us. Just at the trees beyond the glass, her hands clutching the sleeves of her sweater like a child caught in a storm. "I've seen him," she whispered, "not like before, in dreams maybe, or not even dreams, just echoes." Thomas stood, walked toward her, but didn't speak. She pointed toward the woods. "He's still there." She didn't mean the body, that much was clear. Later that night, after Thomas had gone and the fire had died to a soft orange glow, I sat on the porch with the journal in my lap and the reel in my hands. I didn't know what to write, not because I didn't have words, but because for the first time since this began, I wasn't sure whose story I was telling anymore. Mine? Jeff's? Theirs? The knock didn't come that night, but something else did. I woke before dawn, felt it before I heard it, a warmth in the room, like breath. Helen sat upright, sketchbook in her lap. She had drawn 5 figures, 1 large, 2 medium, 2 smaller, all gathered around a tree. At the base of that tree, Jeff's name, carved, underneath it in the same charcoal. "They remember." I looked at her, but she'd already closed her eyes again. She didn't wake until noon. I spent the rest of that morning walking the perimeter. Not to check for damage, not to search for signs, just to listen. I stopped beneath the spruce near the ravine where the roots twist like fingers and the moss smells like thyme. And for a moment, I swear I heard footsteps. Not mine, not heavy, just present, moving away. Then I saw it, tucked between 2 roots covered in wet leaves and thyme. Another carving, same symbol, same hand, not mine. Fresh, the bark still healing around it. I touched it, felt heat or memory or both. And for the first time in weeks, I wasn't afraid. Because maybe it wasn't a warning. Maybe it was a map, leading somewhere we'd stopped believing existed. Somewhere older than fear, older than memory, and still waiting to be understood. It started with the wind dying, not slowing, stopping. Like the whole forest had sucked in a breath and forgot how to exhale. I was in the kitchen, fingers wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold, watching the tree line through the window while Helen dozed in her chair near the stove. The trees weren't moving, not even a sway. The clouds above sat heavy like bruises, no moon, no stars, just this deep, unnatural stillness that made the hair on my forearms rise. Then came the sound, my name, not whispered, not screamed, just said, Crooked. like a voice mimicking speech without understanding tone. It came from the back door, through the wood, barely muffled. My blood ran cold. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The voice came again, rougher this time, stretched like old tape. "Walter." That wasn't Helen, it wasn't Thomas. And it sure as hell wasn't anything that should have known my name. I grabbed the shotgun, not because I thought it would help, but because you reach for what feels familiar when nothing else makes sense. I crept to the door, pressed my ear against the frame. Silence now. But it wasn't empty, it was thick. Like something was on the other side, waiting, listening too. I didn't open it. Instead, I backed away slow, eyes on the latch, and turned to Helen. She was wide awake, sitting straight in her chair, staring out the front window. "The one that spoke isn't the one in charge," she said softly. "It's only the voice." I didn't ask how she knew that. I didn't want to know. The next morning, I found a figure carved into the wood of the porch rail. I hadn't done it. I would have remembered. It was small, rough, but unmistakable. Two shapes holding hands, one tall, one much smaller. No face, no detail, just shape and intent. Later that day, Helen drew it again on her sketchpad without ever stepping outside. She added something new. A third figure, standing off to the side, watching. That night, things escalated. It was just after 1 a.m. when the dogs started pacing. Not barking, just circling the front room, ears flat, tails low. I knew that behavior. It wasn't fear, it was submission, like they were preparing for something bigger than them to enter the room. Then the roof creaked. Heavy steps, not hurried. 1, 2, 3. A long pause. Then the doorknob turned. Just once, just far enough to click, but not enough to open. I sat with the shotgun across my knees, staring at the door, my breath shallow. Then something hit the window. Not hard, just a tap. I turned slowly. Pressed to the glass was a wooden carving. Small, hand-shaped, rough as bark, but clearly crafted. A figure of a human and another creature beside it. Tall, bent, arm extended, and in their hands they each held a smaller one between them. I didn't know what it meant, but Helen did. "They want to be understood," she whispered behind me. "But they don't know what we'll give in return." The temperature in the room dropped fast. You could see your breath. We didn't speak again that night. We didn't sleep. By dawn, the carving was gone. In its place, laying gently at the edge of the porch, was one of Helen's scarves. The red one I thought we'd lost months ago. Folded, clean, dry despite the morning dew. It was tied with twine and a single pine needle, looped like ribbon. I couldn't move, because that scarf had been buried with her mother. Helen didn't cry. She didn't even blink, just picked it up and held it like it had never been gone. "They're reaching," she said. Later, I found her outside, barefoot, in the snow, standing in the clearing just beyond the coop. Eyes closed, arms at her sides. I called to her. She didn't answer. When I got closer, I saw her lips were moving. But the words weren't hers. They were layered, like voices speaking over each other from somewhere inside her throat. Not in English, not in any tongue I knew. Rhythmic, low, pulsing. I grabbed her by the shoulders, shook her gently. Her eyes snapped open and she gasped. "What did they say?" I asked, trying to steady her. She looked at me like she was still waking up. "They're waiting for you." That night, she didn't sleep at all. Sat by the fire, carving shapes into her sketchbook. Pages filled with spirals, eyes, trees with hands. She drew the clearing again and again. Same symbols etched into the dirt. Always 3 figures at the edge. By morning, she said one thing: "They won't leave until you decide." I didn't know what she meant, but I felt it. The pressure. The way the air inside the house no longer felt like it belonged to us, as if something had settled between the walls. Patient, unseen. That evening, I found a small pile of objects outside the chicken coop. Carefully arranged, a stone, a feather, a button from my flannel, a cracked marble, a twig folded into a cross. Each one meaningful in a way I couldn't grasp. Not a gift, not a threat, a message, a memory, something ritual. I left it untouched. Helen watched from the window, her voice barely audible through the glass. "They need to know if you're willing." I asked her, "To do what?" She said nothing. That night it happened again. The voice, but not from outside. From inside the wall, between the studs, like a vibration. It said her name, Helen. But this time it was clearer, closer to her voice, like it had been studying her, practicing. She didn't flinch. "They're trying to speak," she said, "but they don't understand the price of being heard." The air in the room shifted, grew thick, electric. I could feel it humming in my teeth. I closed every window, bolted every door, and then I heard it again, from behind the bedroom wall. 3 knocks, soft, slow, final. Helen stood and walked to the wall, pressed her hand to it gently. "They don't want blood," she whispered. "They want belief." I couldn't breathe. "They need to know if we'll meet them halfway." Then her eyes rolled back and she collapsed into my arms. I carried her to bed. She didn't wake until morning, and when she did, she didn't speak. Not with words, just reached for my hand and squeezed, like the decision had already been made. And somehow, it was mine. But not mine alone, because something else was already inside the house. The morning we left, the air felt hollow. Not cold. Hollow, like everything familiar had been drained out of it. The wind didn't carry birdsong anymore. No rustle of squirrels, no creak of settling wood. Just silence. A silence so full it made every footstep sound intrusive. I stood at the edge of the porch for a long time, boots laced, truck packed, keys in my pocket, staring out at the line of trees like they were holding a secret they no longer needed to hide. I had already unhooked the water line from the well, closed the cellar door, covered the windows inside with cloth. The chicken coop sat empty. The barn too. Tools cleaned, oiled, wrapped in burlap. I didn't want anything to rot. I wasn't coming back. Helen hadn't said much that morning. She'd been up before me, sitting on the edge of the bed, hands folded like she was waiting for a sermon. Her eyes looked clearer than they had in weeks, not just aware, present. But in that way where you can tell someone's made peace with something you haven't caught up to yet. She helped me load the truck, slowly, without being asked. Pillows, blankets, boxes of journals, the film reels, even her sketches, though she stared at each one before slipping it inside the crate. I left the back gate open, not by accident. The forest had never been locked out. We just pretended it could be. By noon, the last load was in. I double-checked the glove box, checked the gas cap, stood with my hand on the hood for a moment. That hood had held every tool I ever used, every animal I ever stitched, every cup of coffee Helen had brought me when I couldn't finish the work before dark. But that morning it felt like someone else's truck. Helen was sitting in the passenger seat when I climbed in. No seatbelt, just a folded letter in her lap. I asked what it was. She said it was for them. I didn't ask who she meant. I knew. We pulled away slow. No music, no goodbye. Just gravel under the tires and the growing pressure in my chest. The house disappeared behind us like a mirage. But they were already there. I saw them in the rearview mirror. 6 of them, lined up across the driveway entrance. Not blocking, just standing. One beside the mailbox, one by the split pine. 2 crouched by the ditch like sentries, one smaller than the others. And at the center, the tall one. The one I'd seen from the window that night. The one who didn't flinch when I raised the shotgun. She stepped forward. Not fast, not threatening. Just forward. I slowed the truck, hands cold against the wheel. Helen didn't look up. She just exhaled softly and said, "Stop." So I did. The tall one came closer, close enough to feel. Her fur caught the breeze just slightly, like the slow movement of memory. Her face was hard to hold in focus, not because it was hidden, but because it demanded reverence. Like looking at the inside of a church when you've already lost your faith. She raised her hand, not fast, just up, and placed it gently on the hood, right above the engine. It wasn't a warning, It was a blessing. Her palm stayed there for what couldn't have been more than 5 seconds. But it felt like a lifetime compressed into a breath. Then she stepped back. The others didn't move, not even when we started rolling again. I didn't look in the mirror that time. Couldn't. The further we drove, the lighter Helen seemed to get. Her hands relaxed in her lap, her jaw unclenched, her eyes closed, not asleep, not sick, just still. I don't remember the highway. I don't remember the turnoff to Boise. All I remember is the way she smiled when she saw our daughter waiting at the station. Not because it was over, but because something else had just begun. Later, when we unpacked the last of the boxes, I found her letter on the floorboard. Still sealed, still folded. I thought about burning it, but instead I opened it. It said, "We are not afraid of you, but humans are afraid of what they don't understand. That's why we're leaving. Not to escape, but to give space. We were never meant to live in fear of you, and you were never meant to own this land. But you tried, and we watched, and we waited, and still, we forgive. Take care of this place, even from far away, because someday someone might listen." There was no signature, just the mark, that carved symbol, the one Jeff left behind, the one I found on the old cedar stump, the one Helen drew in her sleep. I folded the paper and placed it with the others. And that night, long after we should have been asleep, I stepped out onto the porch of our daughter's home, 500 miles from the trees, and looked up at a sky I hadn't seen in years. And for a moment, I could have sworn the wind carried something soft, a breath, a sound, a name. And I remembered what Helen had said the first time this all began, her voice clear and full of something ancient and wild. "They're not trying to hurt us, they're trying to come home." I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because somewhere in the dark, they already knew we'd heard them. They say memory softens over time, that the rough edges of a place, a moment, a face begin to smooth the further away you get from it. But some memories stay jagged. Some press in no matter how far you drive, how many states you cross, how much light comes through a new window. That house, that land, the edge of those woods, it never left me. Not really. We'd been in Ohio for 3 months. Suburb just outside of Dayton. Our daughter had cleared out her art studio to give us a place to settle. She tried her best to make it feel like home. Photos from younger days on the shelf. A quilt Helen's mother had stitched hanging on the wall. A bird feeder out front. Clean, quiet, safe. But nothing about it felt like ours. The air was thinner here, not physically, but in the way that matters. Less heavy, less alive. Sometimes I'd walk out to the end of the cul-de-sac and just stand there, hands in my coat pockets, waiting for something. A breeze, a sound, a feeling. Nothing ever came. Helen was healing, though. That was the part I clung to. Whatever had wrapped itself around her back in Wyoming had loosened. Her hands steadied. Her thoughts returned more often than not. She still had bad nights, but they weren't hollow like before. There was substance behind her silence now, not vacancy. One morning she made pancakes from memory, burned the first batch and laughed like it was 1987. I cried in the pantry so she wouldn't see. Still, she dreamed. And not dreams the way you or I understand them. She said they came softer now, that they sat with her instead of pulling her under, that sometimes she'd wake up with the feeling that someone had touched her hand before leaving. One night I asked her if she missed them. She said no, but then she looked out the window and added, "I think they miss us." I didn't press her, I knew what she meant. A week later, a package arrived in the mail, no return address, just our name. Inside, 2 things, a film reel and a copy of one of my journals, the green one I thought I'd left behind. There was a note, short and written in Thomas's scrawl. "They're not gone, they're just waiting to be understood." Ty. That night, I threaded the reel through an old projector our daughter found at a thrift store. Helen sat beside me on the couch, fingers laced through mine. The footage flickered to life on the wall. It wasn't ours. It was newer, crisper, Security cam maybe. No audio, just a wide shot of the front porch of our old house, except it wasn't empty. There in the glow of a dying porch light sat the youngest one, the small one, the one I'd barely caught a glimpse of the day we left. It was sitting on the steps, knees tucked to its chest, arms wrapped around its legs like a child waiting for someone to come home. Head tilted up toward the door. Still, patient. The footage ran for 3 minutes. Nothing moved. Not the trees, not the frame, not even the creature. Except at the end, a butterfly. Small, bright, absurdly delicate. It drifted down from above and landed on the creature's hand. And it didn't flinch. It didn't brush it off. It just watched it sit there. Watched it leave. Then the footage cut to black. Helen leaned into my shoulder, her voice barely a whisper. They don't mourn like us, but they remember. I sat there in the dark long after she'd gone to bed, thinking about the knock that came at 2:14 a.m. every night, thinking about the mud-streaked handprint on the hood of our truck, thinking about Jeff Hartwell and Thomas, and all the stories buried under snow that never truly melted. And the thought that circled back again and again was this: we were never meant to own that land. We were only ever meant to witness it, to protect it, to listen, not to study, not to define, just to receive. There's a space in my chest that hasn't filled back in since we left. Not a hole, a shape, a presence. Like a song you forgot the words to but still hum every morning. I write less now, but when I do, it's never for me. It's for them, for whatever's left behind that still waits at the edge of that porch, still staring into the trees, still believing someone might come back. Because maybe someday they will. Maybe not me, maybe not Helen, but someone willing to walk quiet, to listen deep, to sit still long enough to be noticed without being feared. And when that day comes, I hope they knock 3 times, soft, and wait, because someone somewhere will know what it means. And this time, maybe, they'll open the door. Sometimes the deepest truths aren't found in the noise of the world, but in the stillness we spend a lifetime avoiding. In a quiet forest, in the space between words, in the ache of something older than language. There are stories, ancient, sacred stories that live in the land itself, not written in books, not explained in facts, but felt in the hush of the trees, in the rhythm of the earth breathing beneath our feet, in the way the unknown stands just outside the firelight, not asking to be solved, only respected. What you've just experienced is not just a tale of mystery. It's a reflection, a reminder that not everything unfamiliar is meant to be feared, and not every silence is emptiness. Sometimes silence is an invitation to listen, to remember, to understand that the world is larger than us, kinder than we imagine, and more patient than we deserve. Maybe the point isn't to chase every answer. Maybe the point is to become the kind of soul who asks better questions, the kind who walks slower, looks deeper, loves quieter. And maybe, just maybe, we aren't here to conquer the wild, but to learn how to live alongside it, with humility, with reverence, with heart. If this story moved something in you, left a shadow, a warmth, or even a question, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters more than you know. And if you'd like to walk with us again into the deep woods of the unexplained, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications. We're just getting started. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening, for feeling, for remembering that some stories aren't meant to be told. They're meant to be kept alive. Until next time, keep the fire low and always listen for what knocks softly in the dark.